Aloha, everybody. This is Rob Haak from the Asia Sales Manager. I'm on the board of the Hawaii Pacific Export Council, or HPEC. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but we're a local nonprofit in Honolulu serving all the Hawaiian islands, and it is our task to educate companies in Hawaii about exporting. And exporting, just to make it clear, is sending product to a foreign country, not sending product to the mainland, but sending product to China or Europe or South America. And of course, Canada and Mexico count as exports. We're able to put on this series of seminars, normally in person, but of course now by webinar, due to a generous grant we receive from DBET, and DBET in return gets that grant from SBA in Washington. So we have the manager of that program, the HISTEP program, is Hawaii State Trade Expansion Program, is Jamie Lum, and she's here with us this morning from Aloha Tower to say a few things. Jamie, I'll unmute you. And can you speak a bit about the HISTEP program?
Sure. Thank you, Rob. And thank you all for joining us this morning. As Rob mentioned, this webinar series is part of our HISTEP, or Hawaii State Trade Expansion Program, which we receive money from the SBA for this program. It is a national program. It is intended as an export development program for our Hawaii companies, for those that either are new to exporting and considering it as a way to expand their efforts, their sales efforts, all the way to those who are experienced exporters and maybe looking to expand into other markets. So thank you all for being here. We have in the past, we've had our HISTEP program for several years now. We've partnered with organizations such as HPEC, with of course, our local SBA office and our U.S. Commercial Service office here in Honolulu, as well as other agencies like the Small Business Development Centers, Innovate Hawaii, which is part of the Hawaii Technology Corporation, and with Department of Agriculture, the Foreign Trade Zone. So we have many partners to put this program together, that help us put this program together. In the past, we've had basically, we've used the funding for what we call our export readiness training, of which this is part of these training seminars, and now webinars are part of that, as well as business advising services that are offered by our partner organizations. We've also done trade shows and Hawaii pavilions, as well as offered financial assistance to companies to help them carry out portions of their export plan. So, but as we move into this time where travel is restricted and many of the large trade shows are being canceled, we are looking at new ways to carry out this program, one of which are doing these seminars online, and a lot of other ways to deliver the program in a virtual capacity or other ways. And I've noticed some of the trade shows that are being canceled, the organizers themselves are looking for ways that they can offer their programs, such as looking at possibly online marketplaces for the buyers that normally attend their shows, to connect with exhibitors that normally come to their shows. So things like that. So anyway, we are looking at, again, other ways to carry out HISTEP, and we just look forward to continuing to work with and help all of our small businesses. Rob has our website up, which is invest.hawaii.gov. And if you go under the exporting tab, you'll find background information on the HISTEP program. And then actually on the right side of our website, if you're not already on our email list, you can sign up to receive our emails for these upcoming seminars and other programs that we have. So if you haven't done that, please do so. And again, thank you for joining us, and I'll turn it back to you, Rob. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Jamie. So you can see from the schedule, here's today's meeting, and then we have 2 more meetings that round out our cycle for the year, an Australia-New Zealand meeting next week, and then contracts for exporters on June 25th. Note that that is at 9 a.m., which is our normal time for having our in-person seminars. So I encourage you to sign up for those as well. Briefly, I mentioned that I'm with the Hawaii Pacific Export Council. Here is our website at hawaiiexportsupport.com. Talks a bit about what we do. And I would also point out our archive of YouTube videos. When we have these seminars, especially when they're in person, we would record them with a videographer and put them online. And they're here. If you just go to YouTube and search the Hawaii Pacific Export Council, you will find that. Okay, let me jump into our presentation. So today's seminar is international marketing. I'm going to focus on Japan, but that's really just because most of our companies in Hawaii are interested in Japan. By the way, this link up here, the bit.ly link, is where you can get this seminar presentation. I put it in the folder there on Dropbox, so you can download that at any time. I talked a bit about HPEC already. This is about me. Essentially, it's saying all I have ever done is sell things in Asia from the US. I've been based in my career in Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, Malaysia, Beijing, Shanghai, Hong Kong, traveled in over 100 countries. And really all I have ever done in my career is sell things in Asia. So let's talk about the 2 types of customers for a Hawaii company. There's the point of sale is in Japan, or the point of sale is in Hawaii. Those are 2 very different types of transactions, and we'll get into that in a bit more detail later. I'd like our companies to develop this model and think about this model as we work to sell products to foreign customers, but particularly for the Japanese. And by the way, anything I say today about Japan, we could really use it for other markets as well. But here we are using your market segment targeted for a touch in Japan, and a touch in marketing terms is how do you reach the customer? How do you talk to them? It could be through a television ad. It could be through a magazine ad, social media, of course, in the modern world. These are the areas where we can touch people. Sorry, somebody's asking me, can I go to full screen? Am I in full screen now? Can you see it? One quick, bear with me. Can you see the full screen now? Jamie, can you see it?
No, I don't see any slides.
Okay, bear with me. Do you see slides now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So with the touch here at the market segment, we'll talk about this market segment targeted touch in Japan, and then flowing around this way when the tourist visits Hawaii, comes around, tourist buys and likes a product, tourist buys omiyage, we'll get to that. Tourist knows how to buy, let's call them refills of the same product in the Japan market, and then back again. And hopefully their friends that they brought the omiyage to like the product, they're bringing it around this way. If they visit, they don't have to visit, but we have inventory or ways for them to buy your products in Japan. That's really the key that we have to work on. Too many of our companies are focused right here, waiting for the visitors to come to Hawaii, and we have to fix that. So what is marketing? This is just very fundamental marketing 101. The 4 P's are product, price, place, and promotion. And that's a key takeaway for today. It's worked for 100 years in terms of general marketing theory, but I think that it still applies very strongly. I would also add that a guy that I've studied a lot over the years is Peter Drucker, a professor, mostly in operations management, but he believed that a company has 2 functions only. It makes things and it sells those things, and those 2 functions are equal. Any other aspect of the company is just a support function for those 2 activities. And then something I've learned in over 30 years of doing sales is the recipe for success is based on making it as easy as possible for your customers to buy from you. And when we're talking about international sales, talking about sales to Japan, that means doing things the way that the Japanese customer is expecting the way things to be done. Do not expect your customers to adapt to you, but you have to adapt to your customers. A lot of our companies fall down in that regard. Let's talk about the product. I believe we have some really incredible products in Hawaii. And if you've heard me talk before, I also say that we have to use the word Hawaii, the word aloha, to our advantage. Those are extremely positive words globally. If you are anywhere in the world and you hear the word Hawaii, you immediately think of blue skies, clean beaches, fantastic water, palm trees blowing in the wind, that sort of thing. And we need to market that, build that into our product and into our marketing as much as possible. So if you've heard me talk before and give a lecture here, you've heard me use the example of Transylvania. Transylvania is a place, it's a real place. But when you hear me say the word Transylvania, what comes to your mind, right? There are people in Transylvania that are trying to sell products internationally. And my point is that they don't enjoy the same word association that we do with words like Hawaii and aloha and what have you. Almost all the Hawaiian words translate very easily and well into Japanese for the most part. It's very symbolic the way that the language works. And so we can use this to our advantage. And I believe that our local companies are not doing this enough, and we need to work on that. One other point I would make is that the Japanese market, by and large, is driven by seasonal sales and discounts that go along with that. Everybody knows the Fukubukuro that we have at Ala Moana Mall in early January. It's that type of thing is going on throughout the year in Japan for various sales and seasons and months and what have you. And it's important to understand that in your marketing schedule. And I encourage you to get used to a calendar that has these types of things. And if, for example, you learn that your market is mostly Korean, then get to know the Korean schedule, the Chinese schedule, the German schedule, whatever it may be. But Japan, the domestic market sales activity is driven very highly by this type of seasonal activity. And so it's extremely important for our companies to adapt to that. Another concept you've probably heard before, but I can't stress it enough when dealing with Japanese customers that are coming to Hawaii, is this concept of omiyage. And omiyage is a concept that is difficult for a lot of Americans to understand, because we tend to think of it, or if we've heard of the word before, we think of it as a souvenir. And that's partly true, but it's more important than that. And Japanese culturally have to return to Japan with some product that tells the story of the trip that they went on. Not just, I went to Hawaii and all I got was this t-shirt, but more important than that. And then there's levels of omiyage in terms of cost and difficulty in purchasing, what have you, that a Japanese consumer would buy for, say, their office colleagues compared to a neighbor or your mother-in-law or your best friend or what have you. There's sort of different levels of expense that are required. And then there's omiyage that's for an individual, or there's omiyage that can be shared with a group of people, say, and you bring one box of chocolate for your whole office or something to that degree. But the average Japanese consumer spends a lot of brain power figuring out the omiyage situation, what to take back to Japan when they visit Hawaii. And the more that you can alleviate that, that brain process that they have to go through to calculate all of this omiyage that they need to return with, the better it is for you, and just make it easy for them. As I said at the beginning, we're trying to make it as easy as possible as we can. Another cultural issue for the Japanese is that they cannot just give a simple gift, even if it's gift wrapped. It has to be in a bag. And the more that our companies can get used to putting the products in a bag that can be given to a recipient of the gift, the better it will be for you. So a unique sort of logo bag that looks nice and can be given directly to the recipient is the best possible solution here. And you can just Google omiyage bag or gift bag online and you'll see what I mean, not just a plastic bag or a brown paper bag. Part and parcel of that is the packaging for Japan is very complex. Japanese love good packaging. And part of that has to do with the fact that they're giving it as a gift. But our companies here typically do not spend enough time on the packaging of their product. By the way, if there's any kind of blue like this, it means it's a hot link. So if you downloaded this presentation, it'll take you exactly to these links here if you click on them. So this one happens to be the Japan Packaging Institute. But I've often said that if plastic became illegal in the world, the Japanese economy would fall apart. And that's simply in terms of the packaging, because they use an incredible amount of packaging materials on a per capita basis compared to any other country in the world. including the US, by far exceeding the US. So please understand that this girl, you've seen a typical Japanese shopper has all of these bags on her. So she could take that bag and conceivably give it to another person, and that would be acceptable, that type of bag. But it's better if you have your product on it. And we'll talk about that more later. Another key point here for the market is that, and a key marketing concept is segmenting the market, meaning find the customers that are most interested in your product or service. So if we just look again at the Japanese market, there's roughly 126 million people in that market. But not all 126 million are your customers. It's probably more like 100,000. And if you make a very niche product, it could be maybe 10,000 people are all that you're targeting. So when you're working on your marketing messaging, that's the target market that you want to talk to. And you want your messaging to sing to those people. And if you think about it, we all get tons of email a day, maybe hundreds of email a day. There's some email you think is spam. There's some that in that email, maybe I don't think it's spam, or your husband or wife don't think that that's spam, but you think it's spam. There's other email that comes in that you say, oh, that's interesting, let me read about that. Could be a mountain biking newsletter, or it could be if your hobby is making flower arrangements, then you might get an email from the Flower Arranging Association that you think is interesting, but I might not think that that's interesting. The point being that everybody has different likes and tastes and what segment they fit in. And we have to make sure that when you're communicating with your key target market segment, that the messaging that you're writing is singing to those folks, and that they look at that message and they say, oh yes, this was for me. It's not spam. I get it. I'm interested in this. And so you help yourself a lot by honing in on what is this key target market segment. So does that mean it's a female of between the ages of 25 and 45, with a certain amount of income, a certain amount of education, with an outdoorsy attitude, likes to be in the sun, these types of things. And so we have to calculate this and figure it out as much as possible. And then don't talk to anybody else. Understand that of this 126,000 people, 126 million people, they are not all our customers. I bring this up here because I think that a lot of our Hawaii companies have an opportunity here for this older group. It shouldn't be any surprise. I think people understand that Japanese genetically live longer and have a good health system, good diet by and large. And so for 126 million people, they have over 100,000 people in Japan that are over age 100, which is pretty remarkable. And in Japan, they use this acronym of QOL, or quality of life, is for products and services that are targeted at this geriatric generation over 65. So you can imagine the average Japanese person will retire around 62 to 65, and now they're expected to live to be at least 90. In some parts of Japan, the average is 92, and many of those people are over 100. I keep drilling down on this point because there's a lot of our natural products here in Hawaii that could easily be targeted at that market for creams and lotions and any kind of type of natural ingestible product. I also say demographically, 110% of the Japanese population are interested in Hawaii. they understand Hawaii, they know Hawaii very well, and they're looking for products and services from Hawaii and that have to do with the Aloha brand behind it. Quickly, just some demographics. I just bring this up to show you that these are cities, many you've probably never heard of, but these are all bigger than the population of Oahu. And there's a lot of people there that can be targeted in marketing messaging if you're interested in just talking to Hiroshima, for example, or Sendai is a beautiful city, or Kitakyushu, beautiful places that we could target if we were interested, just those markets. I also put up this slide just to show you, when you look at average Japanese living expenditures, if you look at the percentage here, you would find that it very similarly breaks down to another place called Oahu, almost perfectly the same numbers. Let's talk about market research for a second. Market research is extremely important, trying to figure out who is your target market segment, what are they buying, how much are they paying for it, etc. But when do you have enough information? You never will. You'll always be doing market research in some way or another, and get used to that. As I say here, there's no secret recipe, but we have to do our best and constantly refining our target market message to get to that target market segment. And we can only do that, in my opinion, by attending trade shows and doing some other activities to make sure we fully understand who is our target market segment and what will drive their buying our products from Hawaii. Let's talk about price. Obviously, if you know your product or service well, you understand what the price is. But I bring this up to talk about international pricing. Is a bit more complicated. With international pricing, as I mentioned already, especially for Japan, we have to calculate some extra packaging, probably some labeling for the Japanese market, particularly if you're selling cosmetics or an ingestible product. You will have to get those tested in Japan so that they're legal, and then adjust your labeling accordingly. And whenever I bring that up, that the testing is required by the Japanese version of the FDA, people panic, but it really isn't that complicated. You can find somebody to help you do this for a rather reasonable cost. And I found over the years that depending on your product, the average price for the testing per SKU is something like $1,000, more or less. Some products are about $700 per SKU, but we can talk about that later offline. We'll talk about shipping too. Shipping, as you can imagine, is a complicated topic when you're out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. We don't, in Hawaii, we can't hide the fact that we're out here in the middle of the ocean trying to ship product to Japan or some other part of the world. And that's not cheap, but there's ways to minimize that. Of course, then when you're shipping a product internationally, there's insurance that comes into it, and then tariffs, meaning the inbound customs duties that could be charged by Japan or some other country. That's what you hear about when you hear about the trade war, those types of things. You usually hear about it in terms of round numbers, like there's a 25% tariff now on steel or something like that. But actually, the tariff system is quite old, and it's published, particularly with the countries that we do a lot of business with, like a Japan, and you can find out through your HS code, your harmonized code, what your tariff would be if you were bringing product into Japan or into some other market. You probably have an agent or a distributor in Japan. and you need to figure out what is the commission that is due to them. And then if, for example, you sell a product that has any kind of warranty claim built into it, you need to figure that out. Not many of our Hawaii companies sell products that have spare parts or that kind of machinery, but if you did, then that's something you need to think about. Another concept when you're working internationally that you'll have to keep an eye on is the foreign exchange rates, often just we call it FX rates. And the foreign exchange rate can be important because it means your product feels expensive or cheap in the local market that you're interested in, depending on how that local currency is trading against the US dollar at any given point. I would also say that in the modern world, compared to, say, when I started out in international sales in 1990, we have PayPal and similar services that allow you to bill in multiple currencies and adjust it to the US dollar accordingly. That's a fairly relatively new phenomenon. It's very helpful, but of course you're paying a commission to those services that do those transactions for you. I bring this up to show you that in the early 70s, the yen was around 350 per US dollar. A lot of that had to do with the US going off the gold standard and Okinawa and what have you. But over time, the trend is obviously going from 350 down to 100. Now, when I was younger and starting off working in Japan and living in Japan and what have you, we were seeing it around 78 yen per dollar. And so at that time, it felt incredibly expensive. If you went to Japan and you were giving them dollars and getting yen in return, and you were going out to dinner or just going to a movie or something like that, it was extremely expensive. You know? So if you do the math, you'd calculate a movie ticket was like $22, or a simple dinner was $40, and you know, just crazy amounts of money for relatively simple things. But what that meant was, on the flip side, the Japanese tourists that come to Hawaii and spend yen, converting it to US dollars, for them it felt extremely cheap, right? And so, you know, those were the legendary times of, you know, they would buy suitcases when they got here and fill them up with omiyage and take them back. Still happens to a certain degree, but what's happened over the past 5, 6, 7 years is that the yen has weakened against the dollar, and now it's, say, roughly 110, in that range, 114 around. It's been relatively stable for a year or so. And compared to 10 years ago, 20 years ago, it feels expensive for the Japanese consumer who's coming to Hawaii. On the flip side, for me, the first time in my adult life, it feels relatively cheap to go to Japan. So there's a flip side to this foreign exchange rate that you need to be aware of if you're dealing with foreign countries and selling internationally. There's a couple more charts on the overall trends of the yen versus the dollar. If you're talking to agents, distributors, end users in Japan, it's best to do this in Japanese paperwork if possible. If you're giving them a quote or you're talking about the quote terms, it's best to do this in the industry specific activity that you're involved in. So if you're, for example, involved in cosmetics, learn what is the cosmetics normal terms in Japan. Did they pay on net 30, or will customers pay on time? Are staggered payments allowed? Meaning they place an order with you, and you can ask them for 40% of the payment up front, 40% on delivery, and 10% after test. I've seen this fairly commonly dealing with Asia, but particularly with Japan, until you get to know a customer and they get to know you, that this is a fairly standard way of doing things with these staggered payments. Of course, we would like to see 100% payment up front, but that's not always possible. So understand that if you have carrying costs on that money you need, then you have to build that into your pricing too. Sometimes this is an issue for our Hawaii companies. As I said earlier, most of our companies don't sell a type of machinery or things that need spare parts, but actually you'd be surprised that there are some things that need some spare parts or warranty replacements. So if you ship a bad product, even if it's a jar of honey, you ship a bad jar of honey from Hawaii and the customer gets it and they don't like it, how do you handle that, right? And over a year, how many of those products need to be replaced? If you're sending a new jar of honey from Japan just to appease a customer, you're certainly going to lose money on that transaction just on the shipping costs alone. So how do you handle that? How do you build all of that into your pricing so that you're not losing money over the long term? Do you stock a little bit in Japan so that you could ship them an emergency replacement quickly? That's one potential option, but we have to figure these things out ahead of time. Shipping, as I mentioned earlier, this is an extremely complicated topic for companies here in Hawaii. The trend that I'm trying to convince our companies to work on is getting more inventory stocked in Japan or the foreign market that you're most interested in, but getting it stocked there so that you can ship it there in bulk and fulfill the order through a local inventory, and it greatly decreases your per unit shipping cost if you're able to send a pallet or so rather than shipping one or two or so at a time from Hawaii. But I strongly recommend that you work closely with shipping companies, whether it's a UPS or a FedEx or Hawaii Air Cargo is very good. Any of those companies can advise you on shipping, and they can also talk to you about the packaging and how safe your packaging is for shipping. In Hawaii, we have several chocolate companies that I've worked with and consulted to, and those chocolate companies need cooler vessels or shipping containers in order to send the product by air and certainly by ocean. It needs to be very, very cool. So those types of things, but know ahead of time before you start sending product internationally, know a shipping company, invite the shipping company representatives out to your facility, show them your product, show them how much you would be sending on a pallet, and they can advise you and save you a ton of money later for broken products and what have you. I was gonna say here, brush up on your Incoterms. This is, I forget what the acronym means, but it's International Container Terms. Basically, it's an internationally accepted list of shipping terms, such as FOB for freight on board or Ex Works or what have you, so that when you're dealing with your agent or distributor or your end user in Japan, you're both singing from the same sheet of music when you talk about the Incoterms. I see a lot of deals go wrong and companies lose money because they're not operating on the same Incoterms as they thought they were with their buyers. So please brush up on that. And again, if it's blue, it's hot linked to an Incoterms site. We covered a bit about this shipping already, but let me jump ahead to here. This is a calculation I did. This is an actual calculation I did for a company I was consulting to in Hawaii where they had a $25 product, customers paying $25 for it, to ship one by flat rate box to Japan was $31. So roughly their overall price to the customer was $70, and then their shipping price per unit was $31. Now, if they build it in, the history behind this is not necessarily important, but the number 24 is important because you can essentially ship 24 units to an end user in Japan more or less without any trouble. There won't be a lot of taxes or tariffs or anything like that. 24 is 2 dozen. It goes way back to right after the war, why that is true, but essentially it is. So right now the flat rate USPS box is $87. So if you're able to put 24 of those $25 units into that flat rate box, the total is $687 to Japan, and see how your per unit shipping cost has dropped to $3.58 versus 31 cents over here. Then if you're able to palletize the product here, put, in this case, 2,500 units on a pallet and ship it by ocean, $500 to put it in a consolidated container. The total price was $63,000, but look at your per unit shipping cost went to 20 cents. This is to an end user in inland Japan, actually. So this included domestic transportation from the port, I think it was Yokosuka, inland to Iwata Prefecture. So 20 cents to ship it is really pretty incredible, right? And that's what we've got to get our companies going in that direction. I know it's not easy for everybody to get from here to here, but that's the goal we have to be thinking about at all times, is getting those quantities up and getting the per unit shipping cost down. Here's just some links on flat rate boxes, and then some companies you can call locally. BNX changed their name. I can't remember off the top of my head who it is, but they're very nice people and extremely helpful. And there's plenty of people here at these companies that can assist you with calculating your shipping costs and what you need to get the products safely through Japan. I would add that most of these organizations too can fairly seamlessly handle any kind of customs and tariff issues that you might run across. Most of our products from Hawaii don't have any problems until you get into shipping alcohol or large quantities of cosmetics or flowers, of course, or shrimp and any kind of live thing. Of course, beef and those types of things are a problem, but most of the creams and lotions and clothing and other products that we're sending are not difficult to get into Japan. Summarize price. Let's talk about place. This is interesting. Let's make sure we are all talking about the same thing here for a distribution model. If you think about all the possible options of selling into a foreign market, these are the ways that you can do it. You could conceivably go to Japan yourself, live in Tokyo or somewhere that you felt was a nexus of customers built up around you, and you could go door to door, knock on the doors with samples of your product and sell it. You could conceivably do that. But that is the most amount of money of all of these models. That will cost you the most amount of money. However, you have 100% control over your success in that regard. The next level down would be an agent, and that's somebody who is working for you, going out on your behalf, selling product, and by and large, you're still responsible for delivering the product to the customer, but you have this person out selling for you, and that person normally takes a commission or you pay them a bit of a flat salary and then a commission on top of that. That's generally the model. Then you have a distributor who is a company that's wholly independent of you, and they're out selling on your behalf, but they're also selling on their behalf. They may have competitive products to yours. I find that in Japan, that's actually quite common. And it's best if you can avoid that, but it's difficult to avoid. And the distributor will sometimes purchase inventory and sell it, sometimes not. If they do purchase the inventory and sell it, we can call them a reseller. And that reseller is the least amount of risk for you. Doesn't cost you very much. You're still involved in the marketing of your product generally, but you have the least amount of control, meaning what they do on a daily basis when you're here in Hawaii sleeping in the night while it's their day, who knows what they're up to. And I find a lot of our companies get stuck here in the reseller mode, and they don't know what's going on in their foreign market. Of course, an option is to do nothing. If you've done market research and you say, this market just isn't for me, that's a perfectly legitimate answer. Here's a list of some of the major stores that I found that our Hawaii companies are dealing with. And not all of them will have English-speaking buyers, so be prepared for that. Here's some apparel stores, major apparel stores that I've sold product to from Hawaii, and grocers that we've sold to. Let's talk about promotion. All right, in dealing with foreign markets, unless you're talking about Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, Hong Kong, the UK, English is not their main language. But I think a lot of our companies in Hawaii are still surprised that English is not common in Japan. I've seen a lot of people go from Hawaii to Japan expecting to speak English to everybody they meet at a trade show or at some fair or at a halal festival, what have you. And it's simply not the case. We have to get used to using the language of the company that we're, or the country that we're selling products to. So we're focusing today on Japan, so let's talk about that. I've been studying Japanese, as I said, for 30 years now. And I still constantly run into things I don't know. And I use this Japanese app, that's actually what it's called, is Japanese. If you look it up in the Apple store, the Android store, it's a great app for wording and phrasing and what have you. But you can't rely on this for translations for your marketing materials or your website or what have you. You really need a Japanese natural native writer. And I say a good writer because even in English, you know, we have people who are good at writing. That's the same in Japanese. There's people who are good at writing, and those are the ones you want to help you translate your materials. Social media for our Hawaii companies is extremely important. I mean, it's important for any company, but it's extremely important for our companies out here in the middle of the ocean, because this is how we interact with the rest of the world by and large. And a lot of our products do really well on social media. As I mentioned earlier with the Hawaii and Aloha theme, with the sun shining and the beach and the water and the palm trees and coconut trees blowing in the wind, a lot of our products were just tailor-made for social media. So the primary platform in Japan is Line, and Line is an instant messaging and chat platform. It's actually a Korean company, Naver, that owns it, but it's extremely popular in Japan. Having used Line for 12 years or however long it's been around, I can't explain why it's popular because I don't think it's nearly as useful or as secure as other messaging platforms, but that's the way it is. And so if you're going to deal with Japanese, you should get used to Line, and get a Line account. It's free, and you can get a corporate account or your personal account, but you can interact with customers through Line. Also, Instagram has gained greatly in popularity in Japan, and I would highly recommend that for most of our companies in Hawaii, they should at least have an Instagram account and a Line account. And since Facebook and Instagram are the same company, you can easily connect Facebook and your Instagram account. So if you had a page in Facebook, what have you. But it's great. Now, depending on your product or service, LinkedIn is also fairly widely used with some professionals in Japan. So if your service was legal or architecture or something like that by nature, then I would highly recommend you doing that in LinkedIn. Now, we go back to what I said here about English. What are you going to do for social media targeting Japanese customers? You should use Japanese. That's right. And generally speaking, just a few phrases or a small phrase, what we would call in English as a participial phrase, a small phrase can be translated fairly accurately here, but I still feel that it's better to run it by a native writer just to make sure. Here's a quick slide I got from satisfaction with social media platforms. You can see that almost 80% of the Japanese market that responded to this survey said they were satisfied with Line and Instagram. They're using it. Here's some of my recommendations over the shorter term for using social media for the Japanese market. There's two companies you probably are aware of, but if not, I think they're good services. It's Hootsuite or Buffer. In many ways, they're 6 of one and half a dozen of the other, but they both allow you to create and schedule social media posts. But you can do it so input one post and then send it out to multiple platforms. So you could create one post and send it to Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn and Instagram and everything all at one time. It just saves a lot of time from moving from platform to platform. I think you absolutely have to have some Japanese verbiage in your website. I like to see on the front page where you have say, a little Japanese flag icon like this, and this ni tsuite means about us. And if you look at any Japanese website, you'll see this ni tsuite and then it's equivalent to about us on a English website. So you don't need to have your whole, unless you're really dedicated to the Japanese market at this point, I wouldn't translate your whole website into Japanese, but just have some verbiage there that they can click on and understand what your company and your product and service is all about. I talk here about once you get involved a little bit more in the Japanese market or whatever market you're interested in, get the keywords translated for your website for search engine optimization. And there's people here in Hawaii who can certainly help with that. A couple people we've had on seminars recently are highly skilled at this activity and can help you with that. I also find that our our companies are not doing well here with maintaining databases of their customers, particularly in foreign markets. They bog down on the kanji names or whatever, but still you should be able to keep some form of a simple database with email addresses and if you can, what part of Japan they're from through the postal code, the zip code, and the name. And even if you have to Romanize the name, say it's Suzuki, for example, just write Suzuki in English, at least so you know how that person is likes to be called. Also, I'd like to see our local companies getting away from using Gmail, Yahoo, Hotmail types of addresses and get their own top level domain, such as, in this case, Asia Sales Manager, but example.com rather than say example at yahoo.com. I think that it goes a long way towards showing customers that you're a real entity and somebody that they would want to buy from and give their money to, particularly when we talk about sending larger orders to an organization. They would like to see that. The other thing too is I find when you're dealing with foreign companies, if you're using a Yahoo address or Gmail, I'm not unfairly picking on those companies. It's just that your email is going to wind up in the foreign spam folder much more often than you would like. Whereas if you have a top level domain, you're a lot more likely to have your emails received by the person that you're actually sending it to. This is something I think that our local companies don't do very well at either. There's a few that I could point to that do a very good job, but most by and large do not send enough email newsletters, and then what's in those newsletters is not singing to that target market audience. So I just talk a little bit here about some of the platforms that can be used to send email newsletters and databases that can be developed. I would also add that similar to English, Japanese has different fonts. Any language will have different fonts, and the font can immediately tell the reader something about the product, whether this is a conservative company, it's a young company meant for people. You can imagine if you receive a newsletter that's written in an all cursive font versus Helvetica or Times New Roman or what have you. They're all quite different and they convey a different message. And it's the same with the Japanese fonts, right? Some of them are extremely traditional looking. Some are much more simple and modern looking. So talk to some Japanese people, native readers, and get their opinion about the type of font that you're using in your communications and your website. This is an example of a email tracking and database that I use. I'm more or less a Mac user, and so I like to use this software called Direct Mail Mac when I'm sending marketing messages for my clients or for my own company, Asia Sales Manager. And most of you are aware of this, but if you're not, what you're able to do is see who opened it, when, where, by and large, what have you. And so, for example, if you can see this person up at the top, they opened the email I sent them 30 times. Okay, there's a lot of reasons why they could have opened it 30 times, but nonetheless, that triggers to me that, oh, that person was interested in what I had to say. So your target market segment, by and large, will be the first several hundred addresses here that have opened it several times, maybe forwarded it to somebody else, and then that person opened it. And so they were triggered by it, triggered in a positive way. And I highly recommend keeping something like this. Even MailChimp or others that are common names, they do this as well. But it's important to understand this as you hone in on your target market segment. There's customer relationship management software, often just called CRM. There's many out there. The biggest is Salesforce.com. If you're happen to be a Gmail user, then Insightly is a good one that I've used. As I said before, I tend to use this one back here, Direct Mail Mac. I have one, a client that I work for a lot that likes Zoho, so we use Zoho for them. But you have to use it religiously and keep track of the amount of times that you're communicating with people. And so I recommend a newsletter roughly quarterly. It depends on your industry and your product and service, but you could use the newsletter to tell people that you're coming to a trade show, give them a reason, you know, not just some random update, but give them a reason to read the newsletter. What's new at our company? We have new products, new services. We have a Christmas sale coming up or what have you. Trade shows, I think, are extremely important. We're very lucky in Hawaii, and I'll get to that in a minute, but trade shows are really, really important. I'm sure that there is at least one very targeted trade show for your product in Japan every year. Probably there's more. And Japan is quite bifurcated down the middle between sort of North and South Japan, or Tokyo and North, and Osaka and South. And there's probably 2 trade shows, one in the North and one in the South, that you could attend. In all likelihood, there's maybe one a month you could theoretically attend, but there has to be at least one key trade show in Japan or any other market you're interested in every year. And you should be there, and you should be there every year. I see a lot of our companies that go to the trade shows don't take enough business cards. Business cards are extremely important in Asia, but maybe nowhere as important as in Japan. So take a box, at least 250, but more like 500 or 1,000, depending on the size of the show you're going to. Get used to the QR code. If you're not used to a QR code, it's here. And if you were to put your camera phone up to your computer and look at my QR code, it would ask you about that. I mean, it would instantly ask you, do you want to put my contact information into your address book? And so this is extremely common in Asia, crazy common in China now. You can't go anywhere without constantly reading QR codes and transferring money and what have you through this, as China's trying to get into a digital currency. This is very important. Sorry, I see some questions coming in, but I'll answer all of these at the end. Don't feel that I'm ignoring you. Another thing that our Hawaii companies don't plan on is that once you leave the United States, by and large, you're not using 8.5 by 11 inch letter size paper. Everything is on what's called A4 paper, which is slightly longer and thinner than 8.5 by 11. Try to get your local printer in Japan to print your marketing literature. If you have an agent or a distributor there before the trade show, try to get it printed in Japan on A4 paper. It's very hard in Hawaii, even at Staples or Office Max or Depot, to get A4 size paper. The reason I bring this up is because if you hand somebody some literature, a piece of paper, on 8.5 by 11, it won't fit into a standard folder outside of the US that is more metric oriented, but particularly in Japan, it's very concise, the A4 and the folders that they put it in, and your 8.5 by 11 letter size paper doesn't fit in those folders. So they wind up just throwing it away most of the time rather than keeping it on file or using it for anything. So I highly recommend this, and it's much cheaper to get it printed in Japan than it is to print it here and carry it over and potentially pay extra baggage fees or what have you. I also find that our companies don't spend enough time setting up customer visits while they're visiting the trade show, right? Meaning you tell potential customers, hey, I'm going to be in Tokyo for the Tokyo International Gift Show. How about I come early or I stay late and I visit your shop or your facility or whatever. Most of our companies, they try to get there on the night before the show, and then they leave immediately after the show and go right to the airport. I think we got to spend more time in market. Going around and checking the competitors at the trade show, see what they're up to, and just going around outside, go to the stores and the markets and walk the streets and go in and see how is packaging done in your industry? What are things like, what are the customers' expectations in that local market? And I said earlier that we're lucky in Hawaii because actually DBET has pavilions at several trade shows every year, international trade shows, that our Hawaii companies can get into much more cheaply than if they were to go on their own and just try to figure it out. If you were to go to a trade show in Tokyo, let's say Tokyo International Gift Show, on your own and get a booth with travel and booth fixtures and everything, it's at least $10,000 to $12,000 at least. And of course, the sky's the limit in terms of how complicated you want to make the booth. But for to get into the Hawaii Pavilion at the Tokyo International Gift Show, you're spending significantly less amount of money because DBET subsidized it and doing a lot of marketing on your behalf and what have you. So the cost is more like $1,500, and then you have travel on top of that. But it's a very good deal. And you should talk to Jamie Lum at DBET if you're interested in any of those trade shows. If you're selling product in Japan, one easy way to get into the market is through Rakuten, Amazon Japan. Actually, Yahoo Shopping, I think that there's several of you who probably haven't heard the word Yahoo in years, but Yahoo Shopping is actually a big deal in Japan, still exists. Not nearly as popular as Rakuten or Amazon. Amazon's making a real push in Japan, and Rakuten is doing their best to hold them off. These are roughly the market share of online sales in Japan, 27% to Rakuten. Rakuten, in my opinion, Rakuten is a bit more complicated to deal with than Amazon Japan, but nonetheless, they're there. And I know that there are Hawaii companies that are successful there. And I know some consultants who are specific to helping companies, non-Japanese companies, get into these stores. Particularly if you're dealing with Rakuten, most of the verbiage in the Rakuten platform is in Japanese, and it's not easy for people from Hawaii to navigate that. Amazon Japan, you could do most of what you need to do in English, but for most of our companies, I think Rakuten is good, a better platform to be in. And if you're interested, I can turn you on to those consultants. Another key point I really try to drive home to our companies is m-commerce, what is called mobile commerce, mobile e-commerce. And when you think about it, 70% of online transactions in Japan are done on a mobile device. So 90% of that 70% is done on a phone. Most of those phones in Japan are iPhones. And it's much more so than in the US or other parts of the world, generally speaking, that e-commerce is done through the mobile device. And so that's something we need to really take to heart. And that means that we have to build our websites so that they're extremely mobile friendly. We have to have our checkout capability being very mobile friendly and being able to get people through with as little as 2 clicks for the product that they want. And I would say that for visitors to Hawaii, note that interestingly, as much as they buy through their phones in Japan, when they get to Hawaii, they buy very little through their phone. And that largely has to do with the fact that most of them don't have a data roaming plan when they get here. But also they're just not as comfortable with buying through an English language site as they would be in Japan. So I bring this up too because compared to Hawaii, the typical lifestyle for a commuter or just average person in Japan is quite different. If you can imagine commuting in Japan in the morning, it's almost always by bus or train. We've all seen the photos of the very packed subways, and I've lived in it for many years, and I can attest to the fact that people spend a lot of time on public transportation. And the Japanese schedule is quite rigid, I think, compared to our schedule here, and that rush hour is fairly well defined, both in the morning and in the evening. And that those are the times when you're targeting those consumers with ads and what have you. So look at this typical subway line. Look at all the ads in the subway itself, the print ads, and then look, what is everybody doing for an hour or two while they're commuting? They're on their phone, doing whatever, playing games, chatting with friends or family or what have you. But that's when they're also shopping and doing most of their shopping like that. It used to be that Japanese consumers were saving things in their shopping cart and then doing the purchases in the evening from a desktop or a laptop when they got home. But that's not the case anymore. We have to get them to buy while they're on the phone itself. I bring up some advertising here. This is once we start getting tourists coming back to Hawaii. It goes back to my original cycle of touches at the very beginning of the presentation, where these print publications are big business, as you can imagine, because this is one way to touch the Japanese consumer when they're here. Now, note, these are not necessarily cheap, how to advertise them here, but I do think that it's important because the tourists that come here are definitely reading these magazines and picking them up. But if you think this is expensive, then look at what it costs to advertise in Japan in similar magazines. These are thicker, glossier, compared to these are often newsprint, as you've seen these all over the place. But these are very expensive and they're thicker. This one, if you can't read it, just says Hawaii. And so somebody who's going on a vacation to Hawaii, they're certainly buying that magazine, and you could advertise in there. It's about $10,000 a month for a relatively simple ad. Here's just some miscellaneous notes I have on promotion. So there are some Hawaii files from Japan. I know that there's some from Korea, from Taiwan, from China, other countries too. And they write blogs about all things Hawaii. But these people are important if you have a product or service. And so try to find out who those bloggers are, particularly the ones that would be interested in a product like yours, and get some of your products in their hands and let them try it and test it and what have you, and get them to blog about it. That's a great, relatively low cost way to get your product in front of a lot of consumers who are going to trust the influencer there. Once you become very serious about a market, and let's say we continue talking about Japan, you should get a Japanese telephone number, +81 country code, and make it seem like you're really in market there. And it's easy to do I use Ring Central for my Japanese number or my Singapore number or what have you. But those numbers will ring to whatever telephone you tell them to ring to. And so somebody that picks up that phone needs to speak Japanese or Korean or Portuguese or whatever language you're target marketing. So quick summary. Of all the companies I've consulted to in Hawaii and mentored one-on-one and met with, what have you, these are the things that I see are common denominators about what's been most successful for them. We go back to the target market segment and knowing exactly who is your customer and then ignoring the rest. A lot of small entrepreneurs have the problem of ignoring the rest, but you'll save yourself a lot of time and money and effort by minimizing the marketing effort and just going after the target market. The product, packaging, marketing all needs to tell a very good story about you and your product. That seems to do really, really well with Japanese consumers, having a great story behind your product and getting the entrepreneur out in front with the product. That does really well. A lot of our companies have a difficult time, I'd say a lot of our entrepreneurs have a difficult time getting their face and their story out with the product. But I find it to be really important, and it enhances the overall marketing effort. Having a Japanese website absolutely helps. At a minimum, just some verbiage, and making Japanese e-commerce easy to do. And that could be, first steps in that direction could be Rakuten and or Amazon Japan. Part of that Rakuten or Amazon or Yahoo is that they have fulfillment services, meaning you would stock product at one of their warehouses and Rakuten's warehouse, and they would ship it out for you. You could also do that on your own. Just have product stocked locally and ship it out that way. You know, send a bunch of product in advance in a bulk shipment and warehouse it, and then ship from that that warehouse. And you've lowered your per unit shipping cost greatly by doing that. Japanese social media accounts. This seems to work extremely well for our companies. If you don't have a Japanese specific account, at least use your normal English-based account and make some Japanese language posts to Instagram or what have you. Magazine ads we just talked about a few minutes ago, those are extremely important. To touch the customers as often as possible, and they do read them. So I know that we talked about this before. A Japanese specific email address. I like this format of japan@example.com because a Japanese person with limited English skills could understand that Japan at, you know, in my case, asiasalesmanager.com, Japan at, you know, Aloha Factory Outlet.com, whatever your company's name is. The Japanese consumer understands that, oh, I can send this message in Japanese and somebody's going to reply to me in Japanese. So what you have to do, though, is have somebody on staff that can reply in Japanese, and you have to be very timely. Normally, a Japanese consumer is just waiting for an instant reply. But within 24 hours, you should be able to reply to that. Japanese email newsletters regularly. Quarterly is good, depending, as I said, on your industry. Monthly may be okay as well. But if you're singing to that target market audience, they're not going to mind getting a quarterly or monthly newsletter from you. Keeping a good database of contacts and specific to the countries that you're operating in, that's extremely important. And regular attendance at annual trade shows, I think, is critical. So what can you do from today to get moving forward towards these, back here, if I call these best practices, this is how you can start from today. working towards getting the best practices going. Start a living document called the Japan Marketing Plan, or again, a Korea Plan or Brazil Plan, or whatever market you're interested in. And start defining your target market segment in that market and forget about everybody else that's in that market. Put some verbiage on the front page of your site, just a paragraph or two, a simple summary, and then over a year you can build on that summary of what your company and your products are all about. Make roughly 1 in 10 of your social media posts in Japanese, and look for the Japanese hashtags. That's not going to be as simple as I make it sound if you're not a Japanese reader, but you can get some help. We have plenty of Japanese speakers and readers in Hawaii that you can find somebody that can help you with that. It's very quick in finding the hashtags. Establish a free Google Analytics account and put those analytics on your website so you can track how often, how many users from Japan are coming to your website, what part of Japan are coming. Maybe you're getting a lot more hits from Osaka than Tokyo or Hokkaido or Okinawa or where have you. That's very important information to know and could help you figure out which trade shows to go to and what have you. Try to send one Japanese language email in the next 3 months, a newsletter, and learn how to understand the click rates and how to do that. It's the software that I showed you earlier, Direct Mail Mac is one, but MailChimp and Constant Contact are others. Start a database of Japanese contacts and play around a little with kanji, understand the difference between a first name and a last name. Just get used to doing that, and keep the Romanized name in your database too, so you can read it easily and you know what is Suzuki versus not Suzuki. Try to go to a major trade show. You don't need to have a booth. You can just go and roam around and learn for 3 days. Most of the trade shows are free to get into, and it's highly useful to just go and move around the show and talk to people and ask questions and learn about packaging and what's expected there. As I said earlier, it's very important to meet with a shipping company and show them your product and talk to them about what it costs to send one to Japan, what it costs to send 10 and 100 and 1,000, and learn those different costs and understand how you get to that point where you can ship 1,000 or several thousand at a time. That's very important to meet with those shipping companies as soon as possible. Look at ways to stock some product in Japan, and certainly trademark your product in the US and Japan or whatever foreign market we're in. This is a holdover from April 17th when we were going to have a trademarking conference on that day. So this is a mistake. There's nothing on April 17th, this past April 17th. I'll hustle through these because I know we're a bit over time. We've talked about this already. Most of these, start working on this part too. This is for when you're in Hawaii. Get your products into nice bags and take away that pain that the Japanese consumer is feeling when they're trying to figure out what omiyage to take back to Japan. Make it as simple as possible for them to buy that omiyage from you. And part of that has to do with having good bags, and then put your business cards or other ways that consumers can find you again into those, the packaging and into the bags. I bring this up again just to go back to, this is the cycle I want our companies to start focusing on here. I put some references for you for other leads of people and organizations here that can help you with your exporting endeavors. Probably one very single person you can talk to once you're interested in exporting to a foreign market is John Holman at the U.S. Commercial Service. He's the sole employee of the U.S. Commercial Service in Hawaii, and he's responsible for all of the Pacific, and he can connect you with commercial service officers in any of the markets that you're interested in, and they can provide a lot of help with doing some preliminary marketing for you or finding partnerships and what have you. It's excellent. Of course, DBET, the Japanese consulate, I found them to be very helpful in some cases. Department of Agriculture with Yukashi Smith, she's very helpful if you have that type of product that you're interested in. These are resources in DC, some resources in Japan that are English-based resources here. Certainly the American Chamber of Commerce in Tokyo can be very helpful. We just had a seminar last week with U.S. Commercial Services officers at our consulate in Osaka, Kobe. Very helpful people there. They're, again, John Holman would be your window into communicating with them. And these are our remaining HPEC seminars for this year. We have contracts for exporters on June 25th. That's at 9 a.m. With Larry Foster. He's a dean at the former dean at the UH Law School. He's an expert on China law, and Keith Suzuka is an expert on Japanese law, and they'll talk about clauses and various aspects that you should be looking for in contracts for when you're selling product internationally. HPEC, the Hawaii Pacific Export Council, one-on-one mentoring is an ongoing activity. Just contact me if you'd like to have some mentoring from me or from any of the HPEC board members, depending on the market and product service that you're selling. We have 35 board members who have a great deal of experience around the world and can help you. That's it. Again, contact me anytime. There's my QR code too, if you want to scan that. And at the beginning on the front page, just to remind you, let me go back there. I put the link to get this presentation up here. You can download this presentation anytime. And also contact me or Jamie Lum, and DBET will also have a copy of this presentation. So with that, I'd say thank you. And there's a bunch of questions. Jamie, did you have anything you want to add?
Just to mention, you talked about trade shows. So right now we do have 2 trade shows coming up at the end of the year. And so far we are, those are still scheduled to be a goal. One is the Tokyo International Gift Show that you mentioned, which is the first week in October. And then the FabEx, the Food and Beverage Expo. And this is the one that's in Osaka that we're doing. That's at the end of October. So you can check our website again, invest.hawaii.gov for information on that, and contact me if you have any questions.
Okay, thank you. So let me go through the questions that have come in. If you have any questions, just type them into the chat area. There's a question that came in from Jamie earlier. Is an agent also considered or called a sales rep? Yes, functionally that's correct. A sales representative or an agent is roughly the same. If you're writing a contract with somebody, you would call them a sales representative or a sales agent. I think that globally those 2 terms are interchangeable. How does one connect with a sales rep in Japan? Well, if you go to a trade show, you're going to be approached by a lot of people who want to be your rep. Some of them are good and some aren't. How do you know that ahead of time? Well, you don't. But you can certainly use the U.S. Commercial Service in that market, because they will more than likely have run across these companies before, and they can advise you on who is more reputable and who isn't. And you can ask other people in the industry who's good and who isn't. And people like me, people at HPEC that I've been working in these markets, we know, and we know how to vet these people. So That's generally how you would do it. You could also, if you're looking for a very part-time person, which I've helped Hawaii companies find part-time people in Japan and other markets, you can run type of Craigslist ads and other things like that, just looking for part-time sales help in the market and help with that. It's not as hard as it might seem to find decent people. Google Plus was shut down by Google. Yes, that's true. That's not really functional anymore. It actually started to take off in Japan, and Google wasn't sure what to do about Japan. They got rid of it. So I was obviously talking about trade shows, and it's a natural question. Well, what about travel in the world of the new normal with COVID-19? So that's a great question. I think that things are going to start again.
Is that okay that I listen?
I like the governor's idea of a travel bubble with Japan, because actually Japan brought up this idea. Japan would like to have a travel bubble with Taiwan and some other areas. Probably not with the US mainland, but with Hawaii would be great. So I can actually foresee that coming, this kind of a travel bubble. So I can imagine that from Hawaii going to Japan will be relatively straightforward in the next few months, not tomorrow, but a few months from now, certainly later in the year, or early next year. And I think that we will be going back to normal. I think that the trade show infrastructure globally is so big that it's not going to disappear. It might decrease a little bit as people are nervous to go to X market or Y market, but generally speaking, we're going to be back in social distancing and wearing masks at these trade shows, but it'll definitely move forward. Use QR code for business card info, website, or sales promotion. All of the above. You really have to get used to the QR code. I would say, if you could virtually go to a trade show in China, or just go to China for a day and walk around, how the QR code is completely taken over all aspects of Chinese daily life, you'd be amazed. It started in Japan with Ricoh. The company Ricoh actually invented the QR code and made it open source, but China's really run with it. But it's still quite common in Japan, and it makes it easy for people. Say you give them a business card and you have a QR code on it. I don't have a copy of my business card in front of me. I could show you, but there's a QR code on it, and you just have to put your camera on it, and it'll ask you if you want to download my contact information, on my telephone number and email address and what have you. So yes, I highly recommend it. It's good also, just put one on your website somewhere so people can scan it quite quickly with their camera and get all your info. And then for sales promotions, it's great. It's like tailor-made for having promotions that link to a Christmas sale or a Fukubukuro or something like that for the marketing material at that time. If we have an English website that is mobile friendly, do we need to translate or make a separate site all in Japanese? Okay, well, that depends on how interested you are in doing business with the Japanese clientele. I would say that some of our companies here in Hawaii do a lot more business with Japan than they do locally, or certainly with the mainland. So in that case, yes, they would have a completely different Japanese website. But I think you get there in stages. It's not worth it, in my opinion, to just make a completely new Japanese website today. I would go in steps, and as I said earlier, just put a few a page with just some verbiage about you and your company and your products in Japanese, and have a little Japanese flag on the top of the page that links to that verbiage, and then just go from there. You know, I think that simple step shows the customers that you appreciate them and respect them and you're interested in them, and you've made the effort to put up some language that's easy for them to understand. And then you just build it out from there. And as you get more customers and you're doing more business with Japan, then you shift your plan and you build out a completely separate Japanese website at some point. And I know people here and in Japan that can help you quite modestly in cost. Actually, it's not as complicated as it might seem. Many non-business individuals I correspond with in Japan use email addresses that are on their mobile phones, for example. Yes, okay, that's fine. But if you were dealing with them in business, you would want to have a more business-friendly address. And that's because as I said, most Japanese people are on their phones or tablets a lot while they're commuting, and Docomo or AU or KDDI or the main SoftBank, the main companies will give you a free email address with your account. And so that's why they have those, like say a Docomo account. If we use Rakuten, Amazon, for edible cookies, do we still need testing first? Okay, that's a very good question. And the answer is probably, but I think it will largely depend on your shelf life of the product. And Amazon and Rakuten are not going to sell products that are going to be spoiled after X amount of time. The liability is too high. So they will certainly be advising you on this as you go through the process. I found a lot of companies here are able to stock product at an Amazon or Rakuten fulfillment center that have not been tested per se, and they're able to skirt around these issues because the consumer isn't buying large quantities, which is interesting, right? Consumers buying 1 or 2, 3 at the most of whatever product their Rakuten or Amazon's selling. So they're able to get around that. But in general, once you start dealing in some quantity, and the magic number seems to be 24, but once you start dealing with a quantity above that, you need to get it tested. And it's better, in my opinion, to get it tested as early in the process as you can, because if you're able to say that it's in your verbiage that our product's been approved by the Japanese government for sale in Japan, that just is incredibly helpful and gives the consumer a much better feeling about the product. Generally, when you go for testing in Japan too, the government doesn't do it. It's some third-party company, of which there's many that are sanctioned by the government to do that testing. And so there's some companies I know of in Japan that test products that have experience already dealing with Hawaii companies, and they understand what's required, and they can do some of the communication with you in English. But of course, all the paperwork that they're doing behind the scenes with the government is in Japanese. Anyway, I can help you find those people when the time comes. Okay, any more questions before we finish? If not, then I'd like to thank everybody for joining our seminar. Let me remind you, the next one will be, next week is Australia. I forgot to put that on here. And you'll see DBAT emails about the Australia meeting next week. And then June 25th is 9 a.m. is the Contracts for Exporters, which is always a popular seminar. So thank you, everybody. Mahalo. Enjoy the rest of your week and stay healthy. Bye.